Okay, it's now working. Okay. So what are the responsibilities of management? Management is responsible for preparing the financial statements that show a true and fair view. Management is also responsible for setting up appropriate internal control systems and corporate governance systems. That's management responsibilities. So because of these responsibilities that management has, the preparation of financial statements and setting up appropriate controls, management is therefore responsible for the prevention and detection of fraud and error. Because these two things that we've mentioned, controls and financial statements, and management has oversight over it. And so if there's to be any fraud, they should be able to prevent and detect it. Then let's move on to the responsibilities of the auditor. The auditor, as we've all known, is responsible for giving his opinion giving an opinion on the financial statement. So that's the duty or responsibility. The auditor's responsibility is to obtain reasonable assurance of the financial statements, that the financial statements are free from material restatements, whether caused by fraud or error. So again, we explained reasonable assurance in our first lecture or so. And we said a reasonable assurance is different from absolute assurance. I don't know if you remember. So they don't give absolute assurance. They give reasonable or a high level of assurance. It means that absolute assurance is that 100% there is no material misstatement, but that's not what the auditor is saying. The auditor is only giving you reasonable assurance, enough assurance, or a highly enough assurance to say that, oh, there are no material misstatements. Because first of all, if you understand how audit works, you realize that the auditors do not test every single transaction that occurs throughout the year. It is highly inefficient to do that, and it can be very impractical and impossible to do that. So the auditors use samples, So it is possible that they may not select an item, that might be fraudulent, or a transaction that might be fraudulent. It's possible, So they give reasonable assurance. It is not the prime. Please keep this in mind. I see people make this mistake a lot because they think that the auditor is supposed to do everything in the world. It is not the primary responsibility of the auditor to prevent or detect fraud or error. It's not their primary responsibility. Although the audits may act as a deterrent to fraud. Yes. So that's why when auditors are coming, people are like, hey, amobo. It doesn't mean that auditors do not discover fraud or audits in the course of the audit. Auditors may discover fraud or error during the course of the audit, but they are by no means certain to do so whenever error or fraud has occurred. They may, but they are by no means certain to do so. So the question arises that, I'm sure if you are an outsider, if someone asks you, okay, so why give an opinion on something that you didn't fully test? Why are you able to give an opinion on it and say, oh, it represents a true and fair view of the financial position and performance of ABC company? Why do you say that when it's possible that it's not even your primary responsibility to detect fraud or error, and two, you didn't test every single transaction? If someone asked you this on the street, what would you say? What will you say? Please, this is a legitimate.
This is serious. So
what will you say? It's a serious question, eh? It's a serious question.
yeah, it is.
What will you say? Why are you giving an opinion on something that?
Okay, so can I try something?
Okay, just try for us.
I'm looking at it this way. The terminology true and fair view. So once we are saying true and fair, I think it's in the right frame to say like to put it that way, even though you've not done like 100% vouching of every transaction for the so to put it as being a fair you know as being fair, I think it's in the right direction, in my view, in a way.
Oh, okay. Who else? So you are saying that it's still true and fair, even though they didn't test every single transaction. It's still true and fair.
Yes.
Okay. Why do you think it's still true and fair?
This way, so once they've been able to select a sample, and I believe that the samples for various components of the financial statement.
Okay.
So once they're able to test for
okay,
able to select samples from all the various components of the financial statement and have been able to go through, I think it is right.
Okay.
Say that they've had a fair, yes.
Okay, so someone is saying here to buttress your point that based on their tests, they can conclude that it's true and fair, especially when the sample is representative of the population. You know. Okay. That was a tricky answer. That was a tricky question. Sorry. That was a tricky question. And so that's why the auditors never say they give absolute assurance.
Exactly. That's what it is.
Yeah. They never say they give absolute. They can't vouch totally for the financial statements. Absolutely, like 100%. They never say that. They say they give reasonable based on the audits. If you read a full and I would urge you to do that. If you read a full financial statement, they'll say based on our audit procedures, the audit procedures performed, blah, 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 blah. It's a whole lot of stuff because they know that they didn't do everything. Okay, so let's talk about the fraud risk factors. The fraud risk factors. Fraud risk factors are simply events or conditions that indicate an incentive or pressure to commit fraud or even provide an opportunity to commit fraud. So you see, that's what we call fraud risk factors. Fraud risk factors. So you can always remember it. This is how I used to remember it. I call it the ROI of fraud, which is ROI. We all know ROI to be return on investment, but I use that to remember fraud risk factors, which is rationalization, opportunity, and incentives. Rationalization, opportunities, and incentives. You can say incentive or pressure, rationalization or attitude, opportunity or, the environment, the existing environment that allows that. So those are what we call the fraud risk factors. Okay, so let's start with, wow, those are some nice slides. let's start with incentive. Let's start with incentive, right? Let's give out some examples of incentives that will cause fraud. When there is high degree of competition and it's accompanied by declining numbers or margins, there's an incentive to commit fraud because management will want to cover their asses. So when there's intense competition, so these are things that the auditor should look out for. When there's intense competition and margins are going down, management will like to pull a fast one. Another thing is high vulnerability to rapid changes. If there's some sweeping changes that are occurring and the company is vulnerable to, and that may create, that anything that may make their product obsolete, then they might find ways to, to engage in some fraudulent activity in order to, again,